I'm Joseph, and this is Fish Jelly. Nick is still in Berlin, so I'm recording this in his absence. This is being called a bonus episode because I didn't want to record our 200th episode without him, but I also wanted to give something to the people. So here we go. I watched TMZ Presents Saving Wendy, I guess I could call it investigative piece that's streaming on Tubi. What is it about? The former talk show host Wendy Williams speaks out from behind the glass at an assisted living facility where a restrictive guardianship has made her a prisoner. I didn't have much hope for this because I've seen other TMZ Presents pieces and they were kind of fluff, but I do have to say, at the end of this hour-long thing, I do think it served the purpose of highlighting the fact that perhaps Wendy's situation needs to be reevaluated. And I'll just start with sort of the conclusion, which is that it's reported at the end that the Guardian has agreed to have Wendy medically reevaluated. And then, of course, inserts that she doesn't think the results will change. The result is that Wendy Williams is suffering from frontotemporal dementia and aphasia and is classified as being permanently incapacitated, meaning that she cannot care for herself. So we learned that. For anyone who listened to her string of interviews last month, a topic that she was very concerned about is not being able to visit, because currently she's in New York, that she wouldn't be able to visit her father on his 94th birthday in Miami. So we find out in the end that she is being allowed to go see her dad for, I believe, 2 days. But a lot of it is stuff we already heard. One of, I think, the best things that this piece did was introduce a neurologist to talk about the condition that Wendy Williams is diagnosed with. This person is not her doctor, but it did talk about the frontotemporal dementia and also differentiating between that and alcohol-induced dementia or brain damage. And Harvey Levin asks this neurologist, like, could the two be confused? Yes, they're very easily confused. Well, when Wendy did that Lifetime documentary and seemed very out of it, she was also heavily drinking, but now she's sober. And I will say that even with her interviews last month, she seems like an entirely different person compared to what we saw in the Lifetime documentary. However, she does not seem tip-top. And the neurologist did say that if a person suffering from alcohol-induced brain damage or dementia did become sober, we could see an improvement, but the effects may be irreversible versus something like frontotemporal dementia, which is progressive. So it would not get better. And so that's sort of the basis of why her people think, Wendy's people think that she should be medically reevaluated. But that being said, my feeling is that she can't care for herself. She should be with people who love and care for her and should have the freedom to enjoy her life in a way that works best for her. But some other things we didn't know or we didn't hear Wendy say in the last string of interviews, the primary thing being that because we know all of this started because Wells Fargo reported Wendy's situation because they found fraudulent activity in her accounts. But it was never really explained what that was and that they initiated this investigation. But in TMZ Presents Saving Wendy, we find out and hear from her own mouth that it was her son, little Kevin, and as she says, any other people who were stealing from her. So basically, her tune has shifted a lot from what we saw in the Lifetime documentary, that she's saying that, you know, her son did some bad things and needs to be basically kept away from her money, among other things, including other people, which is not a surprise, but we hadn't heard anyone say that specifically before. But yeah, I mean, if the court is saying that your finances have to be restricted, but also you're not allowed to be with your family and you're kind of locked away in a facility. And if you put two and two together, it's like, oh, her family was stealing from her. I also find it curious that, everyone's saying that she should be with her family. When we talked about this last time on the podcast, we received a lot of messages about, like, we're wrong. She should be with her son. But, it's like, hello, if the courts and social workers and everyone involved determined that she shouldn't be, it was probably for a reason. And now we know that family was stealing from her. And also during that time, not able to provide her the care she needs. Clearly, with her being in this assisted living facility, she's sober. She seems to be doing much better. But I can see how, if she can be with family who can be trusted and to provide her with the proper care and have someone in charge of her finances, then I think that, yeah, it seems odd that she's in this building. However, like I mentioned before, I used to work in a facility not unlike the one she's in. And for people who are court ordered there, yeah, they are, there are restrictions. But, Harvey Levin asking Wendy, like, are you ever able to leave? And she says no. Well, that may not be the full story. It may be that they do have daily outings, but she doesn't want to go when they say they can go, or she doesn't want to do what they're going to do. Not unlike how she says she never eats outside of her room. And it's not because she's not allowed to enjoy the dining room. It's because she says she doesn't want to be around those old people with memory issues. So clearly she's not very aware of her own situation. But yeah, I think, Harvey doing this interview, it was interesting because he's talking to her on the phone, and so we have Harvey sitting in a studio talking to Wendy on a phone, like speakerphone, with camera crews outside the facility. So we have this camera pointing at the window of Wendy's room on the 5th floor. So that's where that image of her crying comes from. So we see her talking, which was interesting. A couple of times someone knocks on her door and she makes a big deal about it, like as if she's in prison, which to me seems more like people are just checking on her to see if she needs anything, or they're just doing their job. But yeah, she claims she's only been outside twice in 30 days. Again, is that because she's treating it the way she treats the dining room? She also talks about, and she had talked about this last month in those string of interviews, that she was not allowed to go to a storage unit. And then she rambled on forever about how she had some things that she wanted to give her dad and she wanted to keep. And of course, Harvey's just egging her on, like, well, that doesn't seem right. Well, maybe they're not letting her go because where is she going to put it? She lives in a luxury studio apartment in an assisted living facility. There is nowhere for her to put all this junk she wants. I shouldn't say junk. Her keepsakes, her precious keepsakes. We also find out Harvey has, because her Wendy Williams case, those court documents are primarily sealed, but he did have access to some. And one piece of information Harvey had was a court order that basically says that the conservator or guardian has to permit Wendy as much independence as is practical. And of course, Harvey ran with that. Like, well, it doesn't seem like where your current status is practical, or very independent. But again, we don't know her medical condition. She says, everyone knows I have lymphedema, but look at me. I've been standing this entire time by the window and I'm dancing and I'm just fine. One thing I wish that this little documentary would have done, and since they had a neurologist, is to kind of better explain what Wendy's diagnosis looks like. That there are good days and bad days, and that sometimes she does maybe sound like herself, but sometimes she's totally incoherent. Like, we're not getting a really clear picture. We just see her as vibrant as she can be now. I also found it pretty disgusting. Wendy has a friend whose name I didn't catch, but she's a news anchor in New York who claims that she's a good friend of Wendy's. And this lady has the nerve to say Wendy is back at her best. And I just don't know how anyone could listen to Wendy Williams speak in this interview or the string of interviews last month and think that that woman is at the same level as the Wendy Williams we knew 10 years ago. But then this same supposed friend also talks about how Wendy, like at her core, is an amazing communicator. Okay, so if we compare Wendy's communication skills 10 years ago to how she sounds today, there is a significant decline. Like clearly she's having a difficult time communicating. They make a big deal because another sort of court document Harvey Levin had access to was a statement from the judge citing that when the judge was trying to get answers from Wendy, she would repeatedly say, "You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?" and not actually answer the question, which I had talked about last month with her interviews. Like, we all use filler words and statements. And in this TMZ Presents piece, a couple of people talk about Wendy's known for saying, "You know what I mean?" Yeah, she is, but that's all she's saying. Like, she's not actually explaining anything. She just keeps saying the same phrase. And I think I wish there would have been a medical professional who could explain that, yes, there are glimpses of who she's always been within this um, neurological decline. So we can't be fooled by the fact that there are moments when it seems like the old Wendy is alive and well. Because as a whole, listening to her speak, because the episode is an hour long, but maybe we get like 10 minutes of her speaking straight. And she seems repetitive, a little less confused than the last time. Although she was holding one of those Wendy cards, like the purple card she'd have on her talk show. So I don't know if someone helped her with notes. Again, we have her niece, the news reporter, talking about her aunt. And I think that maybe she learned her lesson because she sounded a little more reasonable. But, and so I have to give her the niece credit that now that it's out in the open that there were issues with her son and other family members stealing from her, that Wendy going back to her son is not the best, and that they can find a situation that works best for Wendy to keep her safe. There's an advocate, like a conservatorship advocate who's been assigned to Wendy. I'm assuming assigned meaning like the niece has brought her on to sort of help with this situation. The Again, it gets brought up that the Guardian is working and making money. And I guess I'm confused. Like, does anyone think that a court appointed guardian would work for free? Like, unless we hear actual numbers or that Wendy's paying this person an exorbitant salary, like out of her own money, it seems very reasonable to me that a court appointed conservator or guardian would collect some fee. And I'd be curious to know where that fee is coming from. But getting back to Wendy's supposed friend, the New York news anchor, this lady fully plugs her restaurant and TMZ puts it like an ad. And then this lady has the nerve to say, yeah, Wendy had a drinking problem and, she would come to my restaurant, and then they show the name of it. But, I always made sure she left with food and no liquor, as if like that's special. Like, the one thing a restaurant is supposed to do is be able to send you home with some food. What I don't expect is for a restaurant to send me home with a bottle of vodka. So I just thought that the inclusion of that person felt really tacky. I do think that a fun part of the segment was Harvey at the end asks Wendy, let's take it back to hot topics and show everyone basically that, you're in your right mind. I want to ask you about current events and see how you respond. And I think that she did better than I thought she would. Harvey asks her about Donald Trump and she says good for him, and then she relays an anecdote about how the first time she met him and how he basically called her fat. He asks about Diddy when he says that they need to throw the book at his ass, case closed. He asks about J-Lo and Ben, and Wendy has something kind of shady to say about, like, J-Lo's a problem, but she used to be a nice girl. Wendy says she doesn't know much about TikTok because she's in prison. She asked about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelsey. And I thought Wendy seemed, in good spirits. She's clearly, she has access to television, radio. She says she's not able to get on the internet. But again, I feel like there's no way to really fully understand her situation because it's a private matter. But it would be nice to see her get into a situation where she's not trapped in a high rise, because she is stating over and over again she doesn't want to be there. And for someone who is not a harm to others, it would seem, and maybe to herself, and has enough money to live how she wants to, I don't see why she can't make that happen. But yeah, I'd recommend checking it out if people care about that sort of thing. Next, in the restaurant section, I have to say, so I think the devil's against me, because in between our home and the gym I go to is a Jack in the Box. And one day last week, I was desperate for food, but didn't want to get out of my car because it was raining pretty heavily in LA. So I thought, let me go through the Jack in the Box drive-through, because I don't ever do that. And I discovered they have something called sauced and loaded birria tiny tacos. They came in a box like Chinese takeout, and there were like 12 tiny tacos with, we'll call it birria meat. I can't say that I know that to be true, but and it had cheese, salsa, lettuce, and it came with birria flavored buttermilk ranch dipping sauce. And I think I paid less than $6 for this box of yumminess. This shit is dangerous. The fact that it's in between my house and the gym and there's a drive-through is a serious problem. But I'm glad I tried it, and I will make a promise to myself that I won't go more than once a month to get them. Moving on, there is something in the Sorry to This Man section. We saw Captain America Cherry Blossoms and we reviewed it. And I mentioned in the review straight away that I know nothing about nothing and that I'm just a dumb bitch. But still, there were numerous comments about all the mistakes I made or things that I should have known that I didn't. And apparently, this movie is sort of a continuation of two other movies from like 10 and 15 years ago. That's crazy to me. I think the organization of this universe and the way these stories are released and all these intersecting plot lines, that, I mean, if they're going to do all this, these movies need to come out like boom, 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 one after the other, because I'm not doing homework to watch a new Marvel movie. Like, I just think that's crazy. There is no secret film this week. However, I was a guest this past Friday on the Struggle Reviews TV YouTube channel to talk about the 2025 Netflix series Apple Cider Vinegar. I had a lot of fun doing it. I'll put a link to that stream in the description of this podcast. But since I spent 6 hours watching that damn show, I thought I'd squeeze as much juice out of it as I can. So here we are. I did have more to say, and I did follow up with some research on the actual person. So I figured I could take this time to talk about those things. The story for this series is based on a book. The book is called The Woman Who Fooled the World, The True Story of Fake Wellness Guru Belle Gibson. So it's a 6-part series. At the beginning of each episode, they say it's a mostly true story based on a lie, which I think is funny, especially after the sort of backlash over last year's big Netflix series, Baby Reindeer, and people confusing reality and attacking the person depicted. But I think probably the easiest way to talk about this series is to talk about the characters in it. So I would say there are two main characters, of course, Belle Gibson, and then the woman who she modeled her career after. But first, I'll start with Belle Gibson. So She's Australian. That's where the story takes place. We learn that the way, let her tell it, she grew up in a broken home where there was abuse occurring. She has this contentious relationship with her mother. She ends up running away at like the age of 12 and moving in with like an older man. All of that is very vague. The only thing that's reiterated about her adolescence is that she faked illnesses to get attention. And then when she's older, and her age is in question, but it would seem like maybe when she's 19, 20, she ends up getting pregnant by this loser dude and trying to make a life for herself. We see that at one point she works in maybe like an insurance office doing coding or billing. So perhaps that's where she got her medical terminology from. But it's clear that she likes the attention she gets from feigning various illnesses, disease states, medical emergencies. But where things take a turn is she becomes aware of an influencer who, in this series, is named Mila Blake. Mila Blake is based on Jessica Ainscough, the real life person. But in this series, Mila Blake is a woman who had a form of cancer that at first was detected in her forearm, and she did not want to undergo conventional treatment like chemotherapy. And in this case, and in Mila's case, they wanted to amputate her forearm. So she decided to seek out like a holistic alternative. And then when Mila believed that she had cured herself by drinking juice and doing 5 coffee enemas a day, she she was documenting her journey via her blog, and then ultimately like wrote a book and became quite popular on social media as like a health and wellness person. So getting back to Belle discovers Mila, becomes fixated on her. There's also this idea that Belle at one point went to a hospital claiming that she was having pain in her skull and believed that it was perhaps a tumor. She did get an MRI and was told there was nothing there. But it seems the way this story is telling it is that that's the basis for her claiming she had brain cancer. I'll get to what the actual woman said was the basis of her diagnosis, but she takes that shit and runs with it. It's important to know that originally her first business was called, I believe, The Organic Baby. She was trying to set up a like e-commerce site to sell like baby stuff, and then realized that that probably wasn't the route to go, and that she wanted to go the health and wellness route like her, I guess, idol Mila Blake. So she starts the whole pantry. She's blogging, she's making recipes, but her big idea, and this is back in like the late noughts and then maybe like early 2010s, if I'm recalling correctly, that she had the idea of creating an app. And this is before apps were omnipresent. So she ends up finding some people to help her. She creates this app. And then in the series, literally in a matter of like 15 seconds, the app blows up. We're never really given a barometer or anything to relate her success to, but it would seem like this is now her career, is being Belle Gibson, the health and wellness guru. She ends up approaching a book publisher, getting a deal, writing a book, but then several people in her life, one in particular, decides to out her. And we see Belle trying to get ahead of it. But ultimately, everything caves in on her. The series ends with us not knowing the end result or the consequence of her actions. In fact, it kind of makes fun of it by saying, oh, if you want to know, just Google it. And what we know is that the reason she was caught up is not because she lied about having brain cancer, because as we should all know, it's not illegal to get on social media and really say anything. But certainly, I can get on here and say I have brain cancer. And if everyone feels sympathy for me and wants to, Venmo me or whatever, that's not illegal. So she didn't get in trouble for that. What she got in trouble for was she used her platform to raise money and commit to donating money to certain charities. and then never gave that money. So ultimately, she was fined in excess of $400,000 and has never paid it. And then she's up to some other shenanigans now that I can get to later. But that's Mel Gibson's story. Mila, so Mila's presented as this beautiful young woman who one day finds out she has this, form of cancer in her arm and is told immediately, like at this stage, the best course of action is to do like a partial amputation and undergo chemo. And she says, absolutely not. She does some light research, it would seem, and shows her medical team, like, well, there's a lady who did this and I want to try that. And they say no. So she discontinues that medical team's care, and finds this institute in Mexico called the Hirsch Institute, which is based on an actual institute founded by a German medical doctor. That basically, like, his philosophy was if you starve your body, that's when it starts to heal. So essentially, that's where she got the whole like drinking raw juices, raw organic juice, and doing coffee enemas. So, of course, she spends all her little money to go to this institute in Mexico. She does their treatment, which is just drinking juices and shitting all the time. And of course, she feels better. So she thinks she's cured. And then she starts her journey of blogging about it, writing the book. She becomes popular. But she is telling people, like, I can cure you if you follow this method. She ends up meeting a guy early in her diagnosis named Arlo, who she had a previous like light history with, but she denies it to him initially. And they form a fast relationship. They end up getting married. He stays by her side. But in Mila's case, she wasn't as ambitious. Like, she really believed that she held the cure for cancer. And so, she behaved like a little more self-righteous in that she thought that her goal was to help everyone. So being a good business person, she was not. So we see her kind of peak and then not sort of follow the wave that Belle is able to ride. For example, Mila doesn't care about starting an app. So we see Mila sort of decline with her business, but also her health starts to decline because, of course, she looks great. She says she feels great. And we never really see her arm. Initially, when she goes to the doctor, we see a couple little like bumps in her arm. But then at a point, we see that those bumps are getting bigger. And it's clear that her methods did not cure her cancer. And then it starts to get really bad. Like, it looks really bad. She tries some other form of treatment that isn't what any medical professional would prescribe, and then realizes that it's gone too far. So she tries to get treatment from the same doctors who she initially snapped on and told them she didn't want it. And they basically tell her, bitch, it's too late. You have like 3 months to live. So enjoy that time while you can. Of course, she dies. And then we see Belle show up at her funeral, which I'll get to in a minute. But I think the next character we should meet. Oh, I didn't mention Mila's played by an actor named Alicia Debnam Carey, who I thought was quite good at playing this sort of miserable, self-righteous lady. I also thought Caitlin Dever did a fantastic job as Belle Gibson. But the next character is Chanel, played by Aisha D. So initially we meet Chanel. Well, this series is kind of told out of sequence and, jumps back and forth. But Chanel is introduced to this world as Mila's good friend. And Chanel's history is kind of interesting in that, like, she had a career and a good education and kind of did some interesting stuff, but then it got too stressful. So she wanted to slow things down. She goes back to her hometown, which is where she knows Mila from. And then Mila basically like enlists Chanel as like her assistant without seemingly paying her very much. Again, the numbers, the figures, the finances are all very vague, if non-existent in this series. But Chanel's working for her bestie, Mila, when one day at an award ceremony, Chanel and Mila meet Belle. It's important to know that it's not Mila's first time meeting Belle. A couple years prior, Belle, who I had mentioned kind of used Mila as her blueprint, was kind of obsessed with her and would message her all the time on like the website or message boards. And Mila would respond, like she responded to most people who message her. And Belle took that as like them having a personal relationship. So Belle one day goes to visit Mila at one of her events, thinking that they're going to have like a friendship. And Mila totally blows her off. So Belle is seems like she wants to get revenge on Mila in addition to having her career and doing better. So, getting back to this awards ceremony, Mila and Chanel meet Belle, and Mila realizes, oh my God, I've met her before, like I've met you before. And Belle goes, yeah, no big deal. Clearly you didn't think I was shit, but here I am doing better than you and won the award you were also nominated for. So Mila's feeling real stank. But Chanel, the bestie, is really excited to meet Belle. So they end up hanging out like all night long. And Belle, who throughout the series we see is very, very good at manipulating people who she thinks can do something for her. Belle convinces Chanel to work for her as her assistant. And Chanel says yes. But that night at the awards ceremony, Mila is upset and goes home early. And when she gets home, she does some internet sleuthing and discovers that Belle is a liar. So that's when Mila tries to tell her friend Chanel, like, Belle is a fraud. But it seems like Chanel wants to find that out on her own, and she's really slow to act on it. Eventually, she does. She actually Googles how to perform an intervention on a narcissist. She tries, it doesn't work. But we see that a big plot point for Chanel early on in the series, because again, it's told out of sequence, is that Chanel goes to some newspaper reporters to expose the now popular Belle Gibson. And she does this to a man named Justin Guthrie, played by Mark Coles Smith. He's one of the investigative reporters. And Justin is married to a woman named Lucy. And Lucy is played by Tilda Cobham Hervey. So Lucy's important because she is suffering with cancer and trying to go through treatment, but it's really hard on her, the chemotherapy. And one day she finds Belle Gibson online and becomes one of Belle's disciples and even gets to meet her one time at a coffee shop she works in. So we see that Lucy is a total follower of Belle Gibson while her husband is investigating Belle Gibson for fraud. So for 4 of the 6 episodes, we see 4 or 5, we see Justin trying as he might. But the problem again is that it's not illegal for this woman to say that she has an illness. She certainly doesn't have to prove it. And if the newspaper, and I guess this one has some integrity, they're saying if we can't prove she doesn't have it, we can't print that. But ultimately, they're able to expose Belle for being a fraud with her charity efforts. Okay. Another major character is Clive, and Clive is played by Ashley Zuckerman. And Clive is this IT guy who Belle meets at a convention, like a random convention. And he's not even the person speaking. The person speaking is having some tech difficulties and calls the IT guy Clive. And as Clive is fixing whatever the issue is, he says, oh, I don't know what we would do without Clive. He knows everything. So Belle, knowing who to take advantage of, immediately approaches him and says, hey, I'm working on this e-commerce site. I wonder if you can help me. She immediately sleeps with him, and he seems like the kind of guy who that would mean a lot. And immediately becomes smitten with her, and they become long-term partners. I didn't mention that Belle has a child from an earlier relationship from this loser dude who now Clive is raising. So Clive is like the step father who doesn't have any rights to this kid. But not only is Clive being the best stepfather ever, he's also funding Belle's startup, the whole pantry app. Like he's paying the coders, he's fronting everything, paying the photographer to take photos for the app, all that. And Clive's an interesting character, which we'll talk about more. But at a point, it's pretty clear to him that his partner Belle is lying about her medical condition. And he attempts to confront her. She's able, I guess, to convince him that she's not being deceptive, and he just rolls with it. Ultimately, he does try to force her to go to the doctor, but she threatens him, basically saying, like, I'll take my son away from you. You have no proof. You have basically no equity in this company. We're not married. Like, you won't get anything from me if you leave me. And so he decides to stay. But I think what's most interesting about his character is how complicit he was in his wife's doing. Then we have a character named Heck, played by Phoenix Rye. And Heck is a crisis manager, like an Olivia Pope type. And we see Belle go to him after she realizes that she's been exposed. And at first, this crisis manager sees right through her. But Belle, in her manipulative way, gets this man to come home with her. And this is at the point where she's already a success living in her fancy house with her partner Clive and her kid. She brings this man home and they party all night long, drinking, doing cocaine. And when the morning comes, he agrees to help her. And that basically amounts to her doing an interview for a women's magazine. And it's supposed to be a setup, like a friendly interview where the interviewer is given questions ahead of time that have been approved, and they're just supposed to stick to that script. So we see the interview happen, and at first it goes without a hitch. But the interviewer says, well, now I want to switch gears and talk to you about your mom because we talked to her. And Belle blows up. So, of course, that doesn't bode well for her image redo. And that's pretty much the end we see of the crisis manager, except he plays a critical role in the name of this TV series. So where does the name Apple Cider Vinegar come from? When, towards the end of the series, when Belle goes to Mila's funeral, she bumps into Mila's dad and picks up like their like household cat, like outdoor cat. Mila picks up the cat and the dad goes, oh, be careful, that cat has a ringworm. So we see that Belle ends up getting ringworm on her face, which is so funny because throughout the end of the series, we see the ringworm spread. And by the end, it looks pretty jarring. But the crisis manager Hack, who has a drug and alcohol problem, at the beginning of the final episode, he's in an AA meeting and he gets up to share a story, and he shares a story of his previous client, Belle, and the moment when he knew she was fully full of shit, because he says that she was telling him about how she had ringworm, but then starts talking about how she drank a bunch of apple cider vinegar to get rid of it, and that she was able to pull a tapeworm out of her mouth. And so he says that's when he knew she was lying, because she confused ringworm with tapeworm. And then also tapeworms don't come out of your mouth, they come out of your ass, is what he says. So that's where the title of the film comes from. I think the film should have been titled Ringworm because I thought the ringworm was significant because this woman, Belle Gibson, who seemingly lied about everything, like all of her medical conditions. It's interesting that the only actual legitimate medical condition she has throughout this entire series is a horrible case of ringworm. So I did appreciate that. Okay. Two other very important characters are Tamra and Joe. Tamra and Joe are Mila's mother and father. And Tamara is really important because I know watching, all the stuff on social media about this series and about Belle Gibson, she's painted out to be the villain. But after watching this series, just the series, I thought the villain of this show was Mila because at a point, Mila sees that her mother, Tamara, is sick and is rushed to the hospital and told that she has like bowel cancer. And immediately Mila steps into holistic health guru mode and says, well, we're not going to follow any of your treatment advice. I have my own treatment plan. So Mila basically convinces her mom to do her raw juice coffee enema treatment. And the mom agrees. But we see that the mom is getting progressively worse, while the dad, Joe, is begging his wife and begging his daughter, like, please, please listen to the medical professionals. Please get the treatment they're recommending. They're saying that this is not going to go well if you don't. But Mila basically strong arms her mom. And I thought the most heartbreaking moment in the series is when the mom is just doing so poorly, and the husband, and this is on the eve of Mila taking her mom back to the Hirsch Institute when her mom should fully be in the hospital preparing for surgery. Mila says, we need to go back to Mexico to have a more strict diet so you can get better. And the dad slash husband is begging his wife, please, please let me take you to the hospital. And I thought the most heartbreaking moment is the mom goes that she can't do that because she thinks that would make her a bad mom. Like she feels like she has to follow her daughter's advice to show she believes in her. Like this mother loved her daughter so much that she's allowing herself to slowly die in agony. And of course, the mother does die. In fact, the mother dies on the way. Mila gets her mom to get on a flight from Australia to Mexico. And when they get to that airport in Mexico, the mother has to be wheeled through the airport in a wheelchair, falls out of the wheelchair. We see her bleeding from her ass and then rushed to a hospital where she's pronounced dead. So on top of Mila coming across as this sort of like bratty, miserable, arrogant person, I just can't get over the fact that her pride and her arrogance caused her to kill her mother, even when she knew that this treatment was not helping her. And I find that to be way more insidious than what Belle was doing. Because I think, and I'm not a mental health professional who can offer a diagnosis, but I think Belle is mentally ill, tied to maybe some childhood trauma or whatever the case may be. And I know following up on her after I watched the series, people say that she has Munchausen syndrome, which I guess would make sense. I think this woman is ill. I think she wants the attention that she gets from pretending to be ill. I don't think that she thinks she's actually trying to harm anyone by getting her needs met. And I don't think that Mila set out to harm people, but I think that she, as a function of her being too proud to admit that she was wrong, allowed specifically her own mother to die. Okay. I think lastly, probably my favorite character is Julie. And Julie is played by Catherine McClements. She's the book publisher Belle goes to. And I thought that this character seemed like a fun, smart person who, her backstory is that the division that she's head of at this publishing company is maybe not performing as well. We see her being reprimanded by her superiors saying that, her projects, like she's spending too much on R&D. It's just a cookbook. Like all we need are fun stories, compelling chefs. Like you don't have to spend $35,000 to test recipes. So it's almost like the perfect storm for when Belle finagles her way into meeting the publisher. And of course, Belle tells her lie that she was diagnosed with brain cancer and was able to treat it by, cooking this food. So she develops a relationship with Julie. And I think one of the better moments in the series is when Julie starts to question Belle after Belle contacts her saying, "You're going to hear rumors about me and just know they're not true." So that's when Julie initiates a mock interview with Belle saying, like, "Hey, once the book launches, you're going to have to do a press tour and they're going to dig into your background and ask you these tough questions. So we might as well practice now." And we see Julie asking her these questions that Belle cannot answer effectively. And it's very clear Julie believes that she made a mistake by believing this woman. But she proceeds, and again, another really great moment is at Belle's book launch party where Julie has to introduce her, and Belle gives this really cringy speech that ends with her singing Katy Perry's Roar that I think has to be seen to be believed. she You can see in Julie's face, the publisher, that she can't believe what's about to happen. And then of course everything goes left. Belle's found out. The book is never even published. So of course um Julie's in trouble, but we don't really ever see the aftermath. But yeah, this series, there are a lot of intertwining components. I really love the organization of it. Like it jumps back and forth. And so, in addition to this story, like even told linearly, this story would be crazy. But in the fashion that it's told, I found it gripping. I think the production value is really high. Additionally, I know they spent a ton of money licensing the music that's played throughout this series. But overall, my thought about apple cider vinegar is it's a cautionary tale on who, who like how responsible are we to seek the truth in what we choose to believe, the ideas we adopt, the treatments we pursue. Just it's so remarkable to me that someone would forego a like licensed trained professional, someone who's been vetted, certified. You can go online and look them up and see that they are licensed to practice this sort of treatment, right? A medical doctor, a pharmacist. We see specifically have a full care team, the oncologist, a psychologist, a primary care provider. They even have the gentleman who would make the prosthetic for her forearm. She has a full team in a conference room, and all of these people are very qualified to speak to their portion of her case. And the fact that she's so comfortable saying, "I don't agree with you, and I read about this one woman who tried this thing and it worked, and I want to try that first." It's so remarkable to me that a person would forego a team of qualified people to then listen to, like in the case of Belle Gibson, a young woman who not only isn't qualified, but never said she was. I just, it, it really is remarkable to me. And that makes me want to segue into some of the research I did about Belle Gibson. I would say, so Belle Gibson did an interview with 60 Minutes Australia. If you just go on YouTube and search for it, you'll find it easily. The thumbnail should be Belle Gibson. She's blonde hair with a ponytail, and she's wearing a pink magenta type turtleneck sweater. But listening to her speak, it's just very, very clear that she has issues. And again, I'm using these terms as if I'm qualified to label people, but she seems like a pathological liar. I would totally believe that she has Munchausen syndrome if that means that she makes up medical conditions to get attention. She can't answer a single question like straight. She gives some of the oddest answers, including when she's asked what her age is. You have to watch the interview just to hear her answer the question, "How old are you?" But some things we know, um, after the fact are that she was fine. She's never paid the fine. She also more recently popped up in Ethiopia saying that she was part of some tribe there, some community. That community has since released statements saying that they don't know her, that they wish that she would stop associating herself with them. Also, her brother, who's not a part of the series, um, has spoken out against her because apparently it's not, again, not in the series, but Belle had described her brother as autistic and nonverbal. But then in the he also did a 60 minutes interview after hers, and he seems quite verbal and intelligent, and he does admit that he had some learning disabilities, but he said that his sister would always call him the R word, and that the fact that she referred to him as autistic is very upsetting, that he's always known her to be a liar, that she misrepresented their family, because a character I didn't mention is Belle's mother, Natalie, played by Essie Davis. And we're told that she suffered from MS, that the way she's pictured in the series is that she's like this absentee mother who's more concerned about her own interests than her daughter's. And that once the mother knew that her daughter was a liar, she just basically ignored her. Also in the series, we are told that Belle herself says, I ran away at 12, but doesn't want to talk about who she lived with. We see her go to an older man's house, like in a flashback, older being like a man, maybe even younger than I am. So maybe like in his early 40s. But in reality, when Belle ran away at 12, she went to live with a 60-year-old man, 60, which is very concerning. But I think, yeah, very interesting case. One thing I did feel that I'm sure is a controversial take, but even especially in like the 60 minutes interview she did, there's all this mention, and even other stories I saw online, like about the victims of Belle Gibson, these people who followed her program. And I would argue, or at least I would love to ask these people, like, what responsibility do you have to putting yourself in this situation? Like, why did you forego? Again, some of these people like followed the whole pantry's eating program in lieu of seeking professional medical treatment for their own children. So you trusted this woman with no qualifications to treat your sick child because you didn't trust someone who you could actually verify. I kind of have a problem with like are these people really victims, or are they just gullible, and maybe they maybe instead of bashing Belle Gibson, who I would say, I mean, it seems pretty clear that she's mentally ill, maybe we need to put that energy into teaching the public that just because everything is at our fingertips on our phones with the World Wide Web, it doesn't mean everything's reliable. We can't trust everything. Like, I believe that being an educated person, like an integral component of that is learning how to seek the truth, understanding that when something comes in front of me, I can question it, and that I know how to find the truth in that. But it seems like that's not a skill that's being taught, because I don't know. If I had big lumps on my arm and the doctor's telling me we need to cut it off, I'm going to assume it's pretty serious. And what I'm not going to do is spend all my money at Jamba Juice trying to cure it. I don't know. That being said, this story, as it was depicted in the Netflix series, was gripping. I don't think it's perfect. I think there are some pretty melodramatic moments. There's a time after Belle has been found out, after the newspaper has sent her an email saying, like, we're going to publish this article about you and the charity fraud, and like, we're going to give you a chance to answer other questions, like, do you really have brain cancer? Do you want to give us your medical records? And Belle goes into panic mode and flies her ass to San Francisco to bum rush the Apple headquarters because apparently she's trying to secure a deal with Apple before she gets found out. And it's during that visit to the Apple headquarters that she gets tackled by a security guard, and we see her running comically across the campus. I felt like moments like that were a little silly. Um, Probably, I also didn't love the performance of the actor playing Chanel. I found her annoying, and I think a part of that was the performance, not just the fact that she was kind of like a shitty friend. But my biggest gripe would maybe be that the series doesn't really give us anything to measure Belle's success or impact, because they're making it seem like she was Martha Stewart. And we know that's not true. And then sometimes there's a moment when Belle's talking about her financial situation, and this is after she's already made it, that really nice house she's living in, that it seems like they're renting it and that they're having a hard time paying for it, maybe because Clive, again, is like a stay-at-home dad. So I wish that we would have been given more concrete details about what Belle was able to achieve. I don't want to minimize the fact that she did lie and that, if anything, like question her integrity. But also, it's like, you know, did she really capture a nation and influence hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to forego professional medical care? I don't think that's the case. So, as a series on Netflix and making it overly sensational, it does work, but it did leave a few stones unturned. For that reason, I would give this series 3.5 out of 5. Like I said, next week will be our 200th episode. I don't know. I don't know that we're going to do anything special except be ourselves and have Nick back. So it will certainly be better. The secret film is my choice, so I'm going to try to choose a doozy, although that may not be possible since Nick will be flying that day. So I'm probably just going to have to watch whatever he watches on the airplane. But that's all I have. Thanks for listening. Ta ta.